Hello and welcome to the Retirement Health and Gambling episode of ECPG Live. I'm Tana Russell, Assistant Director of the Evergreen Council on Problem Gambling. And I want to give you a quick reminder that this is live streamed to Facebook and YouTube. If you're watching live, we'd love to see your comments and questions come through. Just keep in mind to share only what is yours to share for public consumption. You can find some resources on this topic already provided in the blog for this episode, and we may add some more for you after it airs. With that, let's bring in our guests. Today we have Dr. Rachel Volberg with the University of Massachusetts and Gemini Research. She is world renowned for her work in gambling and problem gambling, impact and cohort studies, including here in Washington State. And we also have Brent Neiser with What's Next with Money. And he's also partnered on the National Council on Problem Gambling and ECPG on projects. And it is my great honor to have them both here with us.
Thank you.
Hi, Tana.
Hello, hello. So if you wouldn't mind, could you share with the listeners about what you do and why you think this topic is important?
So who do we start with? Me?
We can start with you. You're on the top of the screen. We'll go that way.
I'm on the top of the screen. Therefore, I rule. So I'm a sociologist by training, actually. I graduated with a PhD from the University of California way back in 1983. And I've been doing research on gambling since 1985, which interestingly is only 5 years after pathological gambling was first included in the DSM-3. I spent several years working at the New York State Office of Mental Health, doing an evaluation of treatment programs for problem gamblers. And then in 1992, I started a consulting business called Gemini Research, and I spent the next 20 years directing or consulting on gambling prevalence surveys, impact studies, and cohort studies. And then in 2013, 9 years ago, I moved over to a full-time position as a professor in the School of Public Health and Health Sciences at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. I'm the principal investigator on two very large cornerstone projects funded by the Massachusetts Gaming Commission, including the social and economic impacts of gambling in Massachusetts and the Massachusetts Gambling Impact Cohort Study. And the topic of retirement health and gambling is important to me because of the dire consequences that difficulties with gambling involvement can have on older adults' financial security and physical and mental health.
Excellent. Thank you.
And Rachel and Tana, Brent Neiser here. I'm a certified financial planner and accredited financial counselor, but I've really been a financial educator 25 to 30 years. And years ago, worked with the National Council on Problem Gambling to basically fuse the knowledge of personal financial planning and counseling with the condition of problem gambling and the unique issues surrounding that for individuals, families, and even financial professionals who needed to know how to engage in counseling and what kind of strategies they might use. Since then, I have spoken at the national conference several times and now run What's Next with Money.com or What's Next with Money on YouTube. It's a YouTube channel, and it's really a public service for me to bring a lot of that knowledge that I've worked on a variety of topics. And one of the topics as a financial educator years ago with the National Endowment for Financial Education has been a specialty on retirement planning, especially retirement income planning, as people prepare for those last 5 to 10 years before retirement and what they do in retirement. But it backs up perhaps 2 to 3 decades before that. So we have all that information and a lot of videos that will be made available through this program as well. But I'm glad to be here with you.
Excellent. Well, thank you both for your great contributions to the field. I personally have benefited from your work. I know many others who have, and across the nation. So thank you much for that, and thank you for being here. So let's get started with our first discussion. Dr. Volberg, this one is kind of, I'm going to throw this one at you first, and Brent, you can add some thoughts as well. What are some differences in the gambling of people in various age groups?
There's been a lot of research on gambling behavior and problem gambling prevalence, usually in surveys that have been conducted going back in the US as far as 1976. But with some sort of local variation that is, somewhat dependent on what kinds of gambling are available in a particular jurisdiction or at a particular time. We have generally found that men gamble more than women, and young people gamble more than old people. Furthermore, young men are the group in the population most likely to have a gambling problem. So that's been a very consistent finding pretty much certainly from the time that I started doing prevalence surveys back in 1986. Another sort of very consistent fact is that although African Americans and Hispanics typically gamble less overall than many other groups in the population, more generally whites and Asians, those groups generally have higher prevalence rates of problem gambling. So they're a particularly vulnerable group, and we think it's because of the other sort of kinds of inequality that African Americans and Hispanics deal with. But they typically gamble less, but at the same time, amongst those who do gamble, they're much more likely to have a gambling problem. When it comes to specific types of gambling, this is speaking very generally, men tend to gamble on everything more than women, with one minor exception, which is bingo. And younger people tend to do more private betting, like betting amongst themselves, games of skill in particular, or games that they are playing themselves, like sports, people playing sports and betting on their own performance. Whereas older adults, and this is more like 45 and up, tend to participate more in types of gambling that are legitimate and legalized. So lotteries and casinos. Back in the early days of my career, we didn't have many casinos, but men were much likely to bet on horse races. And then, as sports betting became not legal, but more legitimate and widely accepted, men still are much more likely to gamble on sports than women. I did go back and look at a couple of studies that I actually did back in 2003. One was in Florida and the other was in Arizona. And those are both states that have large populations of seniors, although it's defined a little differently. And so in both jurisdictions, we found that senior problem gamblers were more likely to be male. Surprisingly, they tended to be age 65 to 74 rather than much older. They were more likely to be Hispanic or Black, retired, or disabled. In terms of general gambling participation, they were most likely to gamble on the lottery and at casinos, but especially on slot machines. So this was men and women, and then on horse or dog races, and in Florida, on jai-alai, which in 2003 was actually still legal in Florida. And this was interesting. They were significantly more likely to rate their physical health as poor, to have experienced the death of someone close to them in the past year, and to be categorized as depressed based on a couple of screening questions. So that's what we found about senior problem gamblers in Florida. And I just wanted to share a few of those facts. There's been a surprisingly small amount of research that's been done on older adults and gambling. And, I have another more recent effort that we did in 2017 to analyze gambling and problem gambling amongst Massachusetts adults stratified by both age and gender. But I think I've probably thrown a few too many facts at people at this point, so I'm going to be quiet now.
Well, thank you. I think knowing a bit about what the data says can be very helpful in illuminating how common this is and also how varied it is. And you mentioned that for older adults, they reported experiencing grief or loss or depression or health issues, etc. And we know that those are some things that are pre-existing risk factors for developing problem gambling, and those things may impact people of older generations a bit more than maybe health issues or grief or loss or depression might impact younger people. Not that they don't, but they may just be experiencing that more often, and that may put them at greater risk in certain degrees. And I think it's really important to know.
Yes, the data certainly backs that up.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I'd like to add just some nuance to those statistics. And this is really, some of this is attitudinal and perhaps skill based on money issues. So I think nobody can kind of consider a person with the problem gambling condition as not financially skillful, because those individuals will be on the hunt for streams of income, pots of money like savings or money that they could access through all kinds of means. And now we have so much digital money floating around in terms of different apps and ways money can be transferred person to person. And that's how bets, I'm sure, can be paid off or established. But also then for the families that have a problem gambler in the family, let's say the non-gaming, the non-problem gambling community surrounding an individual with that problem gambling condition, once that's known, they become financially skillful as well to play financial defense, to protect assets. And I would say that in some ways, they over time may become more financially, situationally aware of their financial condition and those of the spouse or the other person that has the problem. And as we'll go through today's webinar, we'll talk about some of the techniques people can use to protect money and to shield it from being basically acquired or stolen or used for gambling purposes. So they're more aware of time. I think they're more aware of identity theft issues, scams. And so, and I think folks should take that they have an advantage then to plan their finances with this condition in their family in a more effective way, especially when it comes to retirement.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Yeah. And speaking of the problems that they may need to be planning around, what is the ripple effect of gambling-related problems later in life, or gambling-related harms that a person might experience?
Well, I'll take a stab at that. So again, looking back at the research, we have found that problem gamblers experience much higher rates of physical and psychological stress. They have very high rates of depression and alcohol and drug dependence. And I'm sure people in the audience who have experience treating problem gamblers know that these are individuals, or as a group, problem gamblers have one of the highest rates of suicide and suicide attempts of any group with a mental health issue. And it's important to also think, as Brent indicated, beyond the individual with a gambling problem, because members of the families of these gamblers are much more likely to experience psychological abuse, physical abuse from the gambler, harassment and threats from bill collectors and creditors, and significant impacts, including insurance companies and social service agencies, as well as the civil and criminal justice systems. And I'll just sort of close out by saying that one of the biggest concerns about seniors or older adults who have gambling problems is that their financial losses are that much more devastating than for younger people, because they have less time to try and recoup those losses and prepare for a comfortable retirement.
Well, that's great insight, and that's one of the challenges of retirement planning. You don't know when you're going to die, and you have to navigate markets, timing. You have to grow your assets to keep up with inflation. And other things that happen to seniors are things like dementia, Alzheimer's, physical disability, etc. You throw in a gambling problem in your family or your active family community life, that's a threat, kind of a heat-seeking threat to those other choices and things you have to navigate. And again, saving for retirement is actually relatively easy when it comes to living in retirement and living off those assets. So what I want to share is some of the dangers people need to be kind of watching out for. The fact that retirement savings in all of its forms, 401ks, IRAs, perhaps if one's lucky enough to have a pension, so many of these are vulnerable as pools of assets that a problem gambler may try to attach to and try to extract. So watching issues such as beneficiary changes, taking out loans at a workplace against a 401k, that can be done without a spouse knowing about it. Because really that 401k or 403b is really in the name of the person. Let's say if it's the problem gambler, they kind of have a solo function. So one thing that could be done with counseling and perhaps proper disclosures is, if this is discovered and the problem gambler is fortunate enough to still be employed, because I know there's a lot of job loss associated with that condition, talking to the HR professional, both spouses, saying, before any changes can be made to this, if there's some way to kind of lock that in. I don't even know if that's backed up by the laws that govern 401ks, but talking to that HR professional to basically try to put a freeze on any loans being taken out against the 401k. Also, password protections about IRAs, just knowing what's happening with brokerage accounts and being able to monitor it as others monitor credit reporting and the way debts are handled. The same thing has to be done for asset protection. And then another one, I'll get into this a little more later, is the election of Social Security. And I think an individual can claim Social Security to start the flow of money. The earliest is age 62. But the later one delays claiming Social Security up to age 70, that monthly lifetime amount, that annuity that comes in that's inflation adjusted, which is very positive, can grow 8% a year between age 62 to 70. So if retirement savings for some reason has been raided by the problem gambler, the preservation of that Social Security, it's like a lifeline, and you want to employ bridging strategies to basically delay the election of the Social Security, either by the problem gambler and certainly the non-gambling spouse, as much as possible, because you need that check to be as big as possible for your lifetime. And Social Security is the only thing around that knows when you're going to die, because it will keep paying and keep going up in value because of the inflation adjustment throughout your lifetime. And that is sort of the lifeline for people who feel their other retirement assets are in danger if they haven't saved enough, or they've actually been rated, taken for gambling purposes.
Thank you. So individuals later in life, past retirement or that kind of age or phase of life, might be more heavily impacted by some of the things we know anybody suffering
Yes.
from gambling related harms can experience, but they might experience to a greater degree in some way because of, like Dr. Volberg said, the co-occurring mental health or cognitive issues or grief or loss, things like that. And what you said, the gambling, when it becomes a disorder, it will seek a way to get money wherever it can. And like you said, it can have some really serious financial complications and devastations later in life when Social Security is tapped into, or an individual doesn't have time to repair the financial problems, or doesn't have the ability to go back and work, right? Or that's
Or
just
to
not a
start the
viable
savings. Yeah,
option for
exactly right.
them. Or
Rachel said that you don't have that much time, and you don't want to take extra risk if you're trying to
right.
make up for lost assets. Even in the markets, you have to be somewhat careful as you do that, and be prudent. And that's why Social Security is so important. And the same thing applies to monitoring credit and debt. Looking at credit reports, even the notion of putting credit freezes on your credit reports, and that can be done. And I have a link to that on this little booklet. There's going to be Rachel will make this available to folks. These are just some of the basic governmental and nonprofit links to sources to help you navigate some of this.
Yes, we have the link to the download for that workbook in the blog already. So if you go to the blog for this page, you can find it there. And I think another thing I'll throw out there that I experienced in the clinical treatment side of things is a hesitancy, when someone realizes that gambling has gone beyond recreational and is starting to cause more problems than goods for them, and they might decide, I need some help, I need some healing, let me get some counseling and overcome this. Sometimes what holds them back is feeling like they can't afford it, or that their insurance won't cover it, or their Medicare won't cover it, etc. And in Washington State, we're very blessed, and in several other states, they have a similar model where there is funding available to help cover the counseling for gambling disorder for that very reason, because gambling disorder by its nature is very expensive, and often people don't have the financial security they used to because of the disorder. And so it's very helpful to have that funding available to cover things when people's insurance or Medicare or not having insurance at all might be a factor they're dealing with. Yeah. So, Dr. Volberg, you mentioned some of the racial and ethnic disparities and how gambling and problem gambling affects people. And Brent, I'm hoping you can touch on this from the retirement perspective. Are there any racial and ethnic disparities in retirement benefits?
Yeah, they are.
And
So don't even worry about problem gambling right now. Just look at retirement as a challenge. Right now, slightly less than 1/3 of white households have zero retirement savings.
Mm-hmm.
And 1/2 of African American households also fit that category, zero retirement savings. Now, here's a quick set of numbers, and this is sort of an average, kind of age 25 to 61, of household finances of the average, or kind of the median amount of retirement savings in that category. If you take all households together, and you think of all those households I just described with zero balance, and that's why these numbers I'm going to give you are so low. For white households, $79,000, just a little over $79,000 in that retirement savings. Asian American, $67,000. African American, a little over $29,000, and Latinos, $23,000. And also, there are many Americans of all ethnic backgrounds, but a little more on the minority side, that do not have access to regular workplace retirement savings programs. No 401k, no 403b, no 457. And they have to kind of do it on their own with retirement savings like through an IRA, or, they're kind of basically just on Social Security potentially. So this is really a national challenge. And then if you add the problem gambling issue, it's worse. But as Dr. Rachel Volberg mentioned earlier, some of the historical inequities, lower home ownership among African Americans, lower inherited wealth, and lower lifetime earnings based on job categories. So that feeds into a less of a safety net, not even talking about government, basically a household family legacy safety net is not there for many of the minority households compared with the white majority household. So that's kind of what we're facing. And again, the situational awareness of families with the problem gambling issue should be an accelerant for planning and protection and taking action. Because basically you've been hit as a household with a financial shock, much like a disability, a health crisis, a natural disaster. And it's a condition known as problem gambling that has hit the household balance sheet and the cash flow. And so with that, knowing that's happened, you can take action perhaps faster than other families can.
Yeah, I think it's so important to highlight, the legacy issues, because another thing that we know about problem gambling is that people who are problem gamblers are much more likely to have had a problem gambler in their past, in their family. And so there's actually some very interesting recent research looking at gambling harms, very, sort of in different domains, one of which is, of course, is financial. But the model specifically includes paying attention to the legacy impacts of having had a problem gambler in your family in the past, because that then, in terms of children growing up in a household with a problem gambler, affects their ability to achieve, financial security going forward in their own, personal and family lives.
So that's another legacy drag on net worth that's
Right.
holding it down, just like some of those other statistics I cited.
Yeah.
And there are things people can do about it. And by the way, on the wealth gap, I call it the wealth gap in retirement. Tana has a video linked where I go into this, as well as things people can do and society can do to try to address some of those.
Thank you for that. And I think this whole legacy of problems from gambling disorder is so hard to spot, right? But when you think about mom or dad has experienced gambling related harms to such a degree that it affects their children's after school activities or sports or college options, etc., that changes their trajectory. It also affects their own retirement and savings and care that they can receive, which also affects their children and what may rest on the shoulders of their children. It affects what they may be able to leave behind to help their child in their next life, and what their children grows up with having access to or not, etc. That then influences their parenting and their children, the grandkids, and it has this legacy of an effect that I think is bravo to researchers trying to get any data on this. Right?
Well, a lot of people don't talk about their money, and it's a lot of, there's a lot of privacy. People are interested in kind of what other people make, but it's not what you make, it's what you keep that's important. And just one, certified financial planning principle for our audience is that you can't borrow your way into retirement. You can borrow money, or your children can borrow money if needed for higher ed, training, and there are all kinds of alternatives: community college, military service, public service. There are, many new online programs, workplace, tuition assistance. So there are new ways to handle the higher ed or training or even vocational training aspect for your kids, but you don't want to um, hurt your own retirement savings and retirement preservation at the expense of your children, because you do not have time to make that up. So they have options, but that's part of the legacy effects. There's likely to be more student loan borrowing for kids of families with a problem gambler, but that can be that can be overcome and managed.
Thank you. Thank you. So many people can, and we say this all the time, but I want to make sure it's on the record here, right? ECPG is neutral on gambling, not for it or against it. It is recreational and stays that way for most of the population, right? So for many, it can be a great outing, social activity, somewhere safe to go. You've got you can eat and play and visit with friends all in one spot. How are some ways, what are some tips that people might want to keep in mind in order to keep it that way, to keep gambling fun and healthy post-retirement without ending up on that slippery slope to experiencing gambling related harms or even developing a disorder later in life?
I'll start. I have just a brief comment on that. And one is they have a little thing in economics called the substitution effect. If you can't control the recreational aspect of it to keep it like a hobby or part of a social outing, like don't go to the casino with your ATM card or a credit card. Try to enforce sort of some self geofencing of yourself with your financial instruments. Go with people you trust who are not going to be excessive, and you can kind of, like designated driver, designated gambler kind of help, so you don't go crazy. But think of a substitute as well. If you find this is dominating your calendar, and especially Dr. Volberg mentioned the statistics of these recent retirees, so to speak, recent widowers. They're looking for companionship and social interaction. But think of other things beyond gaming that you can do to complement gaming, to take up some of that recreational time without the dangers of it getting, kind of out of control. And I'm sure your council has all kinds of techniques of things called self-exclusion. They're, setting limits maybe with the place you go, of, kind of enforcing more of a walling off of the gaming experience from becoming excessive. But you have to really watch yourself. And investing, there are also issues you could do there that are problematic, like buying stocks on margin. We've seen the gamification of Robinhood and all these apps. And some of it's positive to sort of democratize savings and investing, but attending to the core issues of retirement planning, which is not day trading, it's not investing on margin, it's not borrowing money. You have to have those in place. And then actually, investing could be another place for people to, join an investing club and pick stocks and things like that, and actually build wealth and knowledge at the same time while engaging in social interaction.
Yeah, so Brent said all the things that I was going to say about, setting a budget before you leave home and leaving your credit cards and debit cards at home, going with others rather than going alone. I think the idea of, a designated gambler, who's going to get everyone together to leave, after a set amount of time is really good. I guess what I would add to that is from the research perspective, we actually have some very good, strong international research that's been completed in the last couple of years to identify what we call low-risk gambling guidelines. So these are guidelines about gambling behavior that are consistent across 8 different international jurisdictions in Europe and Canada and the United States. And they are intended to give people guidance so that if they can stay at these levels of gambling, their risk of developing a gambling problem remains very, very low. So the low risk gambling guidelines are: 1, no more than 1% of your monthly income should be spent on gambling in a month. The second one is no more than 2 types of gambling that you engage in. So, lottery and casino is the most frequent sort of pattern in the population. Many people play the lottery. Fewer people play go to casinos, but people who go to casinos are also very likely to play the lottery. And then, but if you add activities beyond that, sports betting or horse racing or bingo, that starts to put you on the slope towards being at higher risk. And then the final low risk gambling guideline is not gambling more than 4 times a month. So it's 1% of income, 2 gambling formats, and and frequency of no more than once a week. And so, a lot of people think, well, that sounds like pretty easy, but a lot of people who are heavy gamblers would have a very hard time ratcheting their gambling participation down to those levels. And so that's sort of a population perspective of what would be safe gambling guidelines.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I like the specific tips there. I'll add one thing on the no more than 4 times a month, because for some people they might buy a lottery ticket twice a week, no big deal. And for another person, they might gamble only 2 times in a month, but lose both paychecks. Right.
Right.
Yes.
So let me be clear. It's all 3 of those things together. So, if you're buying a lottery ticket twice a week, you're already over the low risk limit. If you're buying a lottery ticket once a month and you're going to the casino once a month, that's like twice, that's 2 times a month that you're gambling. If you're buying a lottery ticket once a week and going to the casino once a month, that's 5 times a month that you're gambling. And so, it adds up pretty quickly.
It adds up quick.
Especially when you put lottery play in there, because, people have very strong lottery purchase habits. And
it can add up.
It does add up. Yeah. In fact, when I tell people that I study problem gambling, literally the first thing that everybody says, anybody who doesn't know anything about gambling, they're like, oh yeah, every time I go in the convenience store, there's like somebody's buying like, $20 of instant tickets, and like they must have a problem. And I'm like, no, they probably go in once a week and spend $20 on instant tickets, and maybe that's their form of gambling. But there's a lot of stigma around gambling in certain ways. It's public stigma of people making judgments about whether somebody that they see buying instant tickets has a gambling problem, or if they're just enjoying some disposable income in a way that they prefer. But there's also private stigma. People who feel that because of their gambling, they're not managing their finances well. And it's very hard for those people to reach out for help, because they do feel so stigmatized, not just by the outside, but internally, in terms of their own opinion of themselves. And it's really important to understand that if you're becoming concerned about your gambling or the gambling of a loved one, to understand how hard it is to sort of, self-reflect and identify that problem as a gambling problem.
It's
you.
tough, but if you can use it as a catalyst to get help from counseling or from financial professionals that are sensitive to gaming issues, it can be a triumph. You could really turn around a family finances as you kind of wall off the problem gamblers' proclivities and restrict access to accounts in terms of assets and debt. Another thing is home equity lines of credit. Putting debt on things, selling cars. I mean, all kind of. We've all heard stories of people selling furniture, and then maybe going to predatory lenders for quick cash, payday lenders, auto title lenders, pawn shops, rent to own, all these very high interest problems. But when you're ready, Tanya, I do want to, or Tana, I want to mention a few things people can do to kind of use bridging strategies to, if they feel they're under the gun for retirement savings, things they can do to claim Social Security later.
Yeah, please go ahead.
I'll just jump in. And these are from our work with National Endowment for Financial Education. We created a retirement paycheck concept. And I have this in a lot of my videos at What's Next with Money on YouTube. So the key is, if you can, and this can apply to both spouses or partners, even the one with the person with the gambling problem, is to work longer. And here's the benefits of working longer. You have more income coming in. You can engage in thoughtful retirement savings within the workplace if they have workplace retirement savings like a 401k, but also some of that money to go into, let's say, a Roth IRA. You're hopefully delaying claiming of Social Security. And every year you work longer, that Social Security check for each spouse goes up 8%. You cannot get that anywhere. And that's actually a little higher than our current inflation rate, which is inordinately, spiking high right now. And that's locked in for a lifetime. You're likely working longer to have health care provided in some way or a discount, even if it's a high deductible plan. If you have a high deductible health plan, you have a triple play, and I have a video on this, on health savings accounts. You can open health savings accounts, get a tax deduction, and then you have two other types of tax savings with that. It's even better than IRA to save money, and health care is big in retirement. You also have continued access to other benefits with your HR folks through training to upgrade your skills and to keep up with what's going on in your field that might transfer to another full-time job later with better pay, or even transitioning to a part-time job with those new skills you've learned. And you stay competitive. You're in the marketplace. You're not unemployed. You're part of the latest techniques. Your LinkedIn and your other professional profiles look current and active. You also can take the time, if you're in the right field, to plan a small business or some kind of gig economy thing to do either on the side now to do extra savings. And there's special retirement programs for gig workers and folks that are self-employed that are very, very generous, or as your next step after you leave that full-time job. And thoughtful planning of a small business enterprise is really important, because that's where a lot of people might take inordinate risk and actually raid their own retirement savings to become an entrepreneur when they may not have those qualifications. So you can sort of use small business on training wheels while you're still employed. And then the biggest factor, one of the big factors, is your mental health and your social network. And it also uses up your time that you're not necessarily running to the casino. And you go home at the end of the day or the evening shift, you're tired. You may not want to go to those places. And all this time you're saving money, boosting the opportunity for that Social Security check to be higher. And you're in a perhaps joint effort to repair the family finances.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Gosh, you guys have shared such amazing information. I've learned so much just from listening to you today. And as we're about to wrap up, I thought one thing I would add is, gambling can go from being very fun to, oh my gosh, what have I done? Very quickly. For people, it can really sneak up and it can remain hidden for a long time. And I think having some of these guidelines to indicate where a person's on that slope and it's starting to tap into things is really, really helpful. And one of the things that's unique about gambling is because there is this possibility of the win, however remote, it it can be very alluring to say it's worth it to tap into this or to borrow from there or to take this loan or etc., because the win could pay that back and then some, even though the actual reality is it does not make sense to use money you cannot afford to lose in gambling ever. Right? You only, like Dr. Volberg said, maybe 1% of your income, right? It is entertainment. It's in your budget for entertainment only. That's it. You could spend the money eating dinner or going to a movie, or you could spend it on the gambling. Either one, it's fun recreational, but that's how it should be. And I think that's one of the sneaky things that can trip people up sometimes is thinking that the win justifies tapping into money they really can't afford to lose, but it really does not. It really does not.
It's better to make money while you sleep in retirement savings and let investing grow tax deferred. And so if you have this fear of missing out, FOMO, realize you're doing something productive. You're actually winning every day through savings and investing, and even in some cases, the need to pay debts down, including mortgage debts, certainly credit card, consumer debt, before you enter retirement. So that's part of retirement preparation to lower that negative, the liabilities on your net worth statement on your balance sheet. But it's achievable. There are all kinds of ways to do it, and there's a lot of help out there. And certainly we have we have like 30 plus videos at What's Next with Money, and you can subscribe. And our site doesn't sell anything. It's all public education.
So Brent, I just want to ask you, there's an economic concept. I'm not very familiar with economics, but I was very interested in this particular concept of sunk costs, where once you've sort of like gone far enough down a road economically or financially, it's really hard to break out, because you just, you're so far in that you just mentally and emotionally, you can't pull yourself out because there's so much that you've already put into it. And I'm wondering if, I'm sure you're much more familiar with
that. Could be a sunk cost could be a problem as you look at an investment, or let's say a real estate holding like a rental property. Let's say it's not profitable, but you've put effort into it. This certainly is the case with small business. On May 19th this year, 2022, I'm going to have a new YouTube video on small business success and the ways that can be done as part of a financial planning initiative. The financial planning principles to the household net worth of small business. And people that, they might put too much into a small, and they may not be skilled at marketing. The product may be wrong. It might be the wrong location, the wrong timing. They don't have they're not skilled in hiring employees. And so the more the enterprises, and they may need to go to a salaried position or an hourly position or get a second job to handle that. They may have to cut ties to something that has negative sunk costs that don't look like they're going to recover, especially if you're hoping that that's my ticket to a thoughtful, careful retirement. With gig work now, like Uber and some of these things where the infrastructure you don't have to build, you can elect at your time to go in. That is, and you know what kind of cash flow you might earn. That leaning on the business model of the tech entrepreneurs is better, and there's less cost to you doing that. But throughout all this, we got to think about taxes, because there are taxes you have to pay for all kinds of things.
Oh yes, I discovered that when I started my own consulting company, and it was suddenly I had to get a very rapid education in, you know, once that money was coming in, what I had to, what was actually coming in versus what, you know, the contract told me I was getting.
Right. And taxes, you have to kind of do estimated taxes. A lot of people do
Mhm.
in retirement because there's no withholding. And taxes can be also your friend. You want to monitor all the mail that comes in, be aware of all the online accounts, because there will be often tax record keeping consequences of a financial action, rating a retirement, even if it's a Roth or a regular IRA. Certain aspects of borrowing will show up in mail that comes in. It might be kind of late, but you'll need that to prepare your taxes. But that's an indication of financial danger, financial abuse that's happening to your overall financial picture and your net worth.
Thank you for that. And you know what, when it comes to taxes, when someone has lost a lot to gambling, whether it's due to just some risky gambling or maybe even a gambling disorder, and tax season comes around, it can actually be quite problematic, both mentally, the realization of this is what my reality is. I didn't realize I'd lost that much this year, or getting a tax return and feeling like it's all going to go to the gambling, and maybe that can be scary because they maybe don't trust that they'll be able to get it put towards other things they'd rather spend it on. So it all connects, and tax season is right around the
Yeah.
corner for us. So I'm glad you.
And a new question the IRS is asking on every tax return, it's, have you bought or engaged in trading of cryptocurrency? So I have a couple videos on that on Bitcoin, and just to outline the basics. And the only reason I bring that up is because that's kind of a new form of sort of staying in action, or getting exciting. But there are challenges with that. And really, cryptocurrency, most financial planners say no more than 1% of one's net worth should ever be invested in that. It's really speculative money. It's really not retirement savings. But that's something folks have, because that's just a new pathway of money to flow into something that people sort of try to be speculative of. And speculation, to me, implies a bet.
There is argument about whether, you know, uh, financial trading, or being active in financial markets is a form of gambling.
Right.
And
Mhm.
there are some types of of participation in stock markets and in cryptocurrencies that look exactly like betting and like gambling.
Right.
And except for the legality of it, or lack of legality, perhaps, there's probably not a lot of difference between some of the types of instruments that are available to people to trade with and a slot machine.
Absolutely correct. And I do a lot of work in DC. I've been involved on regulatory panels with the federal government and state governments. And regulation for the digital crypto space is not here yet. It's very incomplete. I cover that in my video, but it's coming. And the president just announced a federal interagency approach to look at what regulations need to be thrown at. So it's the wild, wild west right now, even globally, in that space.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. And I just want to give a general reminder to anybody that might be in recovery from a gambling disorder. It's very important for you to be thoughtful about what you might determine is healthy or not healthy for your recovery in terms of some of these investing options, right? Like, what kind of investing options are recovery safe for me, what are not? And even with games and mobile games, it's important for the individual to decide, can I play mobile games? Or there's games that kind of look and feel like gambling or have mimic some of the slot machine sounds and things. So we live in a very complex society. We've got triggers everywhere, and each person has to kind of self-monitor and decide for themselves if it's safe for them or not, and to maybe seek some consultation on that if they need that. And speaking of consultation or counseling or help, etc., there's a lot of resources we want to make sure we leave people with. If you or a loved one, parent, grandparent is dealing with or experiencing gambling related harms, there's a number of places that they can find help, or that you might be able to um, aid them in seeking those help services. One of those in Washington State is the Washington State Problem Gambling Helpline. It is available 24/7. It is 1-800-547-6133. You can call if you're comfortable calling. You can text if you prefer that, or you can hop on our website and chat if you'd prefer to do that. It's totally your choice. But what's nice is a live person is the one who's going to be talking to you each time. Not press 1 for this, 2 for that. You get a live person and connected to resources, whether it's resources for you, or you're calling on behalf of someone else, or you're impacted by someone else's gambling, but you need some help to put your own life back together. It's all there. One-stop shop on the Washington State Helpline.
And then for the National Problem Gambling Helpline, the number is 1-800-522-4700. And like the Washington State line, it is call or text or chat 24/7. Someone will be there to respond to you.
And then, of course, Brent has already told you about a wealth of resources on his website and YouTube channel, where he provides some great financial advice. And he is someone who does know a thing or two about problem gambling. So you can check out his resources as well if you want to look at some of those that he's talked about today. And with that, we thank you very, very much for watching and hope that this was helpful to you.